Look at this map. Every color is a different language family, and the moment you see it, really see it, something strikes you. They're not random. They don't look like confetti thrown across the globe. They cluster. One language family stretches from Iraq all the way to Morocco. Another connects English, Russian, Spanish, and Hindi, languages spoken by billions of people across 2 continents, all descending from a single ancestor. And then there's this island, the size of California, home to over 800 languages, more linguistic diversity in one place than in all of Europe combined. Why? Why do languages behave like living organisms, spreading, splitting, colonizing, dying, in such clear geographic patterns? The answer cuts through 70,000 years of human history, and it starts with a single decision: to walk. 70,000 years ago, modern humans began leaving Africa. Not in one great wave, in dozens of small ones. Groups of 50, 100, maybe 200 people pushing slowly into unknown territory. Each group carried their language with them, like a fingerprint, uniquely theirs. Here's what happens when a community splits. Say one group heads east, another heads north. They share a language on the day they separate. But language is not a fixed object. Drifts. New words emerge. Sounds shift. Grammar evolves. Children grow up saying things slightly differently than their parents. Given enough time and enough distance, 2 groups that once spoke identically become completely unintelligible to each other. This is called linguistic divergence. And it is the single most important force behind everything we're going to explore today. The further a group migrated from its origin, the more its language diverged from the source. This is actually why Africa to this day has more phonetic diversity than any other continent. Human populations have been there the longest. The further out you go, into Europe, Central Asia, the Americas, the more that diversity compresses. Distance from Africa predicts linguistic diversity almost perfectly. So rule number 1, geography shapes language by controlling who talks to whom. And nothing controls that more ruthlessly than terrain. If you want to find extraordinary linguistic diversity on a map, look for mountains. The Caucasus region, the narrow strip of land between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, is sometimes called a linguistic museum. Georgian, Chechen, Avar, Lesgian, Ingush, languages so structurally unusual that linguists still argue about how to classify some of them. Why here? Because the Caucasus Mountains are brutal. Each valley was its own world. Communities lived and died without meaningful contact with the valley one ridge over. Language diverged in perfect isolation for thousands of years, undisturbed. The same logic explains Papua New Guinea. It's not one landscape, it's hundreds of micro-worlds, each sealed off by razor-sharp ridges. 800 languages isn't a mystery. It's what happens when isolation is the geographical default. Rivers tell a different story. They can divide. The Rhine and the Danube historically acted as political and linguistic fault lines across Europe. Or they can connect. The Amazon served as a trade highway between Amazonian communities, creating zones of shared vocabulary even between completely unrelated languages. And coastlines? They create contact zones, places where languages that have nothing in common start borrowing from each other, not just words, but grammar, syntax, even sound systems. The Balkans are the perfect example. Greek, Bulgarian, Romanian, Albanian, completely different language families, yet they share grammatical structures found almost nowhere else in the world. Not because they're related, because they've been neighbors for centuries. Linguists call this a sprachbund, a language league, a club you join not by ancestry, but by geography. Geography sets the stage. But humans, specifically humans with armies, can completely override it. Latin was a regional dialect spoken in central Italy by a few 100,000 people, unremarkable by any measure. The Roman Empire changed that. When Rome fell, Latin didn't die, fragmented into 6 modern languages, spoken by hundreds of millions of people today. French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian, Catalan, all descended from a single administrative language imposed by soldiers 2,000 years ago. Empire doesn't just conquer territory, it exports language. Arabic started as the language of one peninsula. The rise of Islam and the prestige of the Quran as an untranslatable sacred text turned it into the language of scholarship, trade, and prayer across an enormous geographic zone. Not just through conquest, through cultural gravity. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, spread Turkic languages from Turkey to Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan. Today, you can travel 4,000 kilometers across Central Asia and encounter languages that, while distinct, share a clear common architecture. And then there's English. The British Empire at its height covered a quarter of the Earth's land surface. English is now spoken on every continent, is the default language of science, aviation, and the internet, and has more non-native speakers than native ones. That is not an accident of culture. It is the legacy of organized territorial expansion. Here is the uncomfortable statistic. Of the roughly 7,000 languages spoken today, linguists estimate that at least half will be gone by 2100. And the ones disappearing are not random. They are overwhelmingly the small languages, indigenous languages, minority languages, in regions that have been absorbed into larger nation-states. Languages that were never given institutional support, never made official, never put in schools or on signs. The mechanism is almost always economic. If you want access to education, jobs, government services, you speak the dominant language. Your children grow up bilingual. Their children might only speak the dominant language. Within 3 generations, a language spoken for thousands of years is gone, sometimes with its last speaker. This has happened to roughly half of all languages that have ever existed. What replaces them is always the language with the most institutional power in that region. And institutional power, historically, concentrates in geographically advantaged places, fertile valleys, coastal trade hubs, navigable rivers. Even extinction has a geography. Now, here's where it gets counterintuitive. We've been talking about isolation as the driver of diversity. But contact, the complete opposite of isolation, creates its own fascinating patterns. When 2 language communities live side by side for centuries, even if their languages are completely unrelated, something strange begins to happen. They don't just share vocabulary, they start sharing grammar. The Balkans, again, Greek and Romanian share a grammatical feature. putting the definite article after the noun instead of before it, that is almost unique in the world. These languages come from completely different branches of the family tree. They developed this feature together because of proximity, because of centuries of trade, intermarriage, and coexistence. The Indian subcontinent takes this even further. India has multiple language families with almost nothing in common. Yet across nearly all of them, north and south, related and unrelated, you find retroflex consonants. Sounds made by curling the tongue backward, extremely rare in languages elsewhere. Not inherited, absorbed, through millennia of contact. This means the clusters you see on a language map are always about ancestry. Sometimes a cluster forms because people lived near each other long enough to start sounding like each other. Geography doesn't just separate, it also fuses. For the first time in human history, physical terrain is no longer the primary barrier to communication. The internet has made it theoretically possible for a teenager in Lagos to communicate daily with someone in Seoul, in real time, for free. So, is geographic clustering about to collapse? The short answer, not really. And the reasons are telling. Research consistently shows that people online communicate predominantly in their own language, and predominantly with people who are geographically close, share cultural references, and exist in the same media ecosystem. Digital space has not replaced geographic community. It has, in most cases, mirrored it. What the internet has done is dramatically accelerate the spread of a handful of dominant languages, especially English, into spaces where regional languages previously held firm. And it has created new contact zones where internet slang and neologisms cross linguistic borders almost instantly. A word coined in an American internet forum can be adopted, adapted, and localized in a dozen countries within months. But here's the thing. The languages thriving in this environment are the ones with deep community roots and institutional support, which again tends to correlate with geographic and political power. The digital revolution hasn't broken the logic of language geography. It's accelerated it. So, why do languages cluster geographically? Because humans migrate in groups and groups drift apart. Because mountains and rivers decide who can talk to whom. Because empires impose their tongue by force, and economic gravity pulls smaller languages into the orbit of dominant ones. Because even in contact, neighbors begin to sound like each other in ways no one planned. Language is not just communication. It is a map of human history. Every cluster you see is the trace of a journey, a conquest, an isolation, a reunion. It is 70,000 years of human movement compressed into color. And the next time you hear an accent you don't recognize, or encounter a word borrowed from a language on the other side of the world, you're not just hearing sound. You're hearing geography.